further ado, I am going to introduce our guest this evening, who you may remember from a previous episode, Dr. Jennifer Manlowe. And since the mid 1990s, Dr. Manlowe has worked as a professor, author, chaplain, and life clarity coach. She is a licensed family therapist, holds a master's of divinity, a PhD in psychology and religion with a specialization in gender identity. Now, as a relational systems therapist, her sole focus is supporting people eager to be connected to others and themselves with greater courage and authenticity. And a common denominator for clients she sees is that they're navigating an important life transition. And it's especially relevant this evening, just in time for the dreaded Valentine's Day. Dr. Manlowe is going to be discussing her new book entitled Cracking Up: Notes of a Good Girl Gone Mad. And this book draws from her research as a scholar of gender, psychology, and religion, her professional experience as a secular therapist, and her personal experience being trained to be a good girl as a Roman Catholic in the late 20th century. So we will get into all that with her. And because, as I mentioned, Dr. Manlowe is a working professional, she actually has had to step away for some work obligations. But don't worry, we have recorded a presentation that she's giving to us, a discussion about her book this evening, about this topic. And we're going to play that for you now. And she's going to come back in and be here live for the Q&A and the hangout and everything like that. So she is here with us live this evening, and we have some prepared remarks that she has made for us discussing her book. So we're going to begin with that. And if you don't mind, go ahead and not roll that tape, because that's not what the technology is that we're using, but let's start that video. It turns out this is fortuitous timing because you have a book coming out.
Super psyched to share it with people, but it's so great that you and I get to chat in between times, and I get to tell you, oh my gosh, it's coming. It's finally coming. So
yes, and I am so excited for that. Yes. And so for people who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about your work that you're about to tell us about?
Yes, I sure can. Well, it's I'm just having it right here, and it's originally I came up with this jacket with this woman on with a mask on, and this was easily 5 years before the pandemic. So she has a mask on, but it's because she's carving into the carcass of old ideas and pulling them up and out to look at the kind of the diseasing of the body, with these old ideas. As a young girl, I felt like I could crack up mentally based on all these lessons I learned as a young girl, being Catholic, but also in a culture where women were increasingly encouraged to be liberated from strictures, that were repressive. So cracking up, it says, it's on the back of the jacket I'm reading, is a girl book written in the form of a letter by that growling girl in me who cannot tell a lie. Oh yes, that girl is really a fully grown woman who will now recollect all the peculiar advice she's received regarding what makes a young girl a successful woman. So, and then I use the vehicle of a letter. So this book is written as if it were a letter of counsel to girls in general, but especially Catholic or religious girls, so that they could know, beware of the messages, beware not just the religious messages, but the larger social, political climate messages that have female fulfillment being a very mixed message. So I use the kind of framework of a letter because it frees up my voice to just be more, conversational. And it also, I can also kind of elbow my nieces in my imagination. They're listening, right? I can go, can you believe we have been taught this stuff? this stuff about what makes a good girl and what makes a happy woman.
Yeah, and I love that because, last time you were here, we talked a little bit about you have an academic book as well that's, very much more formal, which is wonderful. I love reading that as well. And this one, though, has such a more kind of it's just a more fun feel to it. It does, like you said, it kind of feels like having a conversation, with your aunt, for example, about, hey, here's some things that you might want to know about.
Right. And it's okay to question. And before you and I were talking, talking now, we talked a little about questioning being so radical. If you've been raised as a religious person, you're raised to obey. You're raised to say sorry for questioning, and maybe even getting punished for, kind of who do you think you are to raise your ire, to be offended by the law. And
Yeah. And these kinds of tropes that you get into talking about in the messages that you received, I mean, it does kind of feel like people are giving you the law. And you even mentioned in some cases, some of these things are in fact written into law, or at least protected by law. I don't know if any examples come to mind that you'd like to share about that, but I found that particularly fascinating.
Well, definitely. I mean, just the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That's a protecting by law that women's bodies are not their own. That if you even help a woman who's trying to find safe and legal abortion, that you could be arrested as well as she. So just even driving someone to a clinic across state lines, both of you could be arrested in 2023. That is Margaret Atwood says that this is the time that she would have thought that we would have been able to see and learn from history, but it is Handmaid's Tale time that we're somewhat living in. And I do feel, obviously there's tons of progress too, but there are some real serious backlash to women's autonomy, bodily autonomy.
Right. And, package it however you want. That's what this is. People can say it's, various other reasons, but interesting how it seems to affect women's bodies, not so much men's.
Right. And the interesting thing too is, why now? We have 8 billion people on this planet. And so why now? I do think it is a vexed issue that has a lot to do with racism. We want to make sure women, largely white women, are still having babies. And so this law, it's very much in a backlash against choice and a backlash against a very multicultural world where, we're seeing more folk in leadership that represent the world instead of just white folk. And that is frightening to some.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that you bring up here too, that, there are a lot of different ways that women are affected by these kinds of laws, and a lot of different sort of social situations and conditions that people may find themselves in that can impact how the legislation is going to go and what it's going to mean for their lives. This very differential impact on people who have, different financial as well as social resources. That's pretty terrifying. And that's an interesting point that you make too about who it's perhaps being directed towards. Yikes.
Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah.
So that sort of white male supremacy in the world, it sounds so hyperbolic to use that term, white male supremacy, as if there's a plot. But the thing is, I'm really just pulling back the lens and pulling way back and looking. It may not be plotted out like a map, but it is a kind of power arrangement that is sustained. And it's sustained through our cooperation, and everyone in the group plays its part. I'm sorry I keep coming back to this film that I've just seen called Women Talking, and it's so a microcosm of what we have in my opinion, in America. As a religious person, raised religious, that film was filmed in a barn. It was supposed to be a true story of women in the Mennonite tradition in a place in Bolivia that were experiencing sexual assault in high numbers from ages 3 to above 60, I think. And they were trying to strategize, do we leave this place? Do we stay and fight? Or do we stay and comply? Stay, obey kind of combo, and just keep it quiet. And I feel that this is up for Academy Award, and I believe it is in part for best film, I believe, and best screenplay, because it captures our time right now. Are we going to stay and pretend there isn't racial, gender, sexual violence, queer violence? Are we going to just keep going along and getting along? Or are we going to stay and just be angry? Or are we going to create a community that is more viable, that allows for variety and dignity of each human being, regardless of their sexual preference, whether they even want to be coupling or not, whether they want to have children or not? So it's a really powerful, kind of very utopian film. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone, so I'm not going to say more. But it feels like, for my work in the world, it feels very exciting for me that conversation could be kicked off. And you know how film, just like radio, can kick off good conversation.
Well, absolutely.
What kind of world do we want?
Mm-hmm. And just the fact, to me, I love the title of that film, and I think it's based on a book as well, Women Talking. I mean, it's centering women's voices, very explicitly, and telling us that it's doing that. Like, hey, maybe we should listen. And I love that it's not men talking about women's issues, for example. Not that there's anything wrong with men talking about these issues, of course, but we're talking about women talking. This is who should be making decisions about these things.
Exactly. Yes. And the Canadian writer Miriam Toews, I think is how you say her name. Mm-hmm. So she was the one who was formerly Mennonite. So that's kind of fascinating to have her tell this story, based on a community in Bolivia. Yes. So anyway, I don't want to say more, but I do want to recommend it. I do want to recommend it. Sarah Polley is the director, and I kind of feel like she has a little part in it, and I don't know how I'd find out, but she's a wonderful film director of several movies and also an actor. So I'm hoping she wins. So that's enough about that. But popular culture is part of this book, Cracking Up, because it does look at how girls and women have been raised. Now, it doesn't look at how boys have been raised, but they have been raised in the same culture in, let's say, my community of Catholics on Mercer Island, where I grew up. Boys and girls raised in the same Catholic framework had the idea of what a good boy is, what a good girl is, and they were only two, binary. So that world, if you were queer or odd, and I like to use the word odd, meaning I'm not a binary, I don't fit what a good girl would look like and be like, I don't fit what a good boy or good man would look like. So who am I? So though I don't identify as non-binary, I do identify as a person that didn't feel like I fit the good girl mandate. And for me, the good girl mandate would, I sort of wrote down a little, this is what I got. Is it okay if I just read you what I sort of nutshell what I got?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Be a good girl, be a good Catholic girl, be a servant like Christ, be a docile girl, don't say no, and don't talk back, right? Be a desirable girl, be a Playboy bunny girl, be eager to be married girl, be a mother whose clock is ticking girl, be a mom who hasn't lost her girlish figure, be a career girl if you dare, because you could be an old maid who never found her man. If you're bookish, you're probably plain. And finally, if you are alone, you're probably a cat lady who's wacky and will die alone. So that's the life and times of what in my book, a nutshell of what I was taught. But then, Kara, you get this moment in time that we're in where all of that seems to be royal. It could be me just projecting my unique experience, but it seems to be roiling right now. And I don't want to make it a political, because I know your audience is diverse. So I don't want to single out any one politician or anything, but there has been so much, so many accusations of sexual violence and uh, gendered violence and in the political arena. And as we were saying before, legally, there is even more control seeming to be marshaled in the Supreme Court, even. Again, majority are Catholic, and seems like there's quite a bit of a slapdown on women's autonomy. And so I do feel these things seem to come together. There's this pressure cooker of good girl obeys, good girl wants to be a mommy, good girl isn't sexual, but she needs to want sex when I do. Call it he. So the binary, she fits a good binary. But see, the reason I chose cracking up is because you'll go crazy if you are tossed in this tumbler of these binaries of good and bad, and girl and boy, and straight or straight. And I have straight or alone. Like you don't, it's not straight or queer, it's straight or alone. And that was the warning, be coupled. So anyway, that all comes back to Valentine's Day being the coupling of the year time. I just like to say that pressure to be a couple can also make people feel they don't fit a binary.
Yes, I love that you brought that up and that we're having this conversation now, right before Valentine's Day, because I know that's one of those occasions that can really cause a lot of stress and anxiety for people who are worrying about, their relationship status and, maybe it's not fitting this expectation. That can be a difficult reminder for people that they're not, quote unquote, doing it right, but who says that that's the right thing? Why do you have to be a couple on Valentine's Day? I can buy my own chocolates. I mean,
and because I'm a couples therapist, I see people with tremendous heartbreak that these promised bliss through binary, husband wife coupling or male female coupling and marrying and happy ever afters. You would think, oh, Jen, people know better now. We're not children. We're not Disney, et cetera. But we were raised on Disney. So it's good to remember, you know, this this happy ever after pressure is part of why people say we better go to therapy because we're not happy ever after. So that's when they come to see me and say, what's the deal? When I was shopping for her or him, they looked this certain way. When I bought him, her, meaning married them, I thought they would stay this way. And instead they turned into someone else. So that we both are, in terms of these binaries, they're both partnering in a false binary. It's first off, we're not really those things, but we're pretending to be something so that we get something called relationship or couple. And then we wonder why we're not happy. Well, first off, we've bought, this is a consumer model and a contract-based happiness. If you look like your post or your selfie or your your Tinder image, then I can get you. And if I get you, I can make you love me. And if I can make you want me and love me, we can get married. I mean, it's very consumer driven.
Really is. I hadn't thought about it in quite those terms before, but you're right. It's like we've just completely commoditized, turned people into commodities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's so dehumanizing. Oh, yeah, no wonder. I don't disagree. We complain a lot about how, oh, Valentine's Day, it's just a commercial marketing gimmick. Oh, well, and yeah, in a lot of ways, I think that's probably true, but it seems like maybe we've turned the whole relationship into that as well, or the whole relationship trope, as it were.
That idea of feeling swindled, she sold me a bag of, false bag of goods. Or he said he would rescue me or whatever. But when I worked in domestic violence hotlines, I did hear that he was my knight in shining armor. You probably remember me telling you that before, but I wish it were only once or twice, but every single woman I worked with used that term. When we first met, he was my knight in shining armor. And I think that's just a great example that those Disney, no shade Disney, but raised us to think that there is a rescue that we need.
Yes.
And what is it that we need to be rescued?
Right. Whose fantasy is this? What is this doing for women?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate those tropes, and I'm so glad that we have started to see, some different kinds of messaging for girls in shows. I like that, but it does seem like some of these old, outdated tropes sure are hanging on hard.
Right. And I do think there is an effort to be more spacious and even, I'm thinking of Valentine's Day again. We come back to that, but can we find, is there a higher suicide on Valentine's Day? I know with Super Bowls, some days there's supposedly, research that's shown there's about a 15% jump of domestic violence hotline calls. And so, again, these are stressful themes. Do I have a real man? If I'm a real woman, do I have a real man? How do I know? Because he loves football, or I love a man, I love football, whatever. But the main thing is I'm kind of hyper masculine here. And if my team loses, I'm going to hit somebody. If my team wins, I'm going to celebrate by breaking stuff. I mean, you see those flipping cars. These aren't only men that do this, but if they were, largely white men celebrating, right, through violence is not punishable by law, it seems. But when it becomes men of color, say, throwing things or tipping over a car, they're going to jail. And so I do kind of feel there's this double standard again with what do we call violence? Oh, it's just boys being boys, or is that the way we rationalize it? That's if they're white, I have to say. So gender and race, socioeconomic place, it seems that there are some common themes that people feel afraid of breaking out of their team. I mean, that's sort of coming back to the Mennonite story, is if I question how power moves here, I might be excommunicated. And I think that, again, this may sound like a jumble, but I do feel that part of why we see more violence is that people don't know who they are or what team or group they belong to. And because they're not at the top anymore, white male, I'm talking now, they feel displaced and replaced. And that's in part why you hear the Jews will not replace us. Remember that march with the right, the neo-Nazi march? Yeah.
Oh, yes, that was awful.
So yeah, I do feel that this isn't out of nowhere that we have these binaries being so threatening, is people don't know who they are, and people who are uncomfortable, as we are with when we're uncertain, we will try to punish difference and say there are only two teams, and my team's going to win. And if it doesn't, I'm going to throw a fit. And that comes back to why domestic violence goes up during sporting events.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, and I can see why that would be the case if it's kind of a performance of this sort of over the top, violent masculinity, depending on the sport.
Mhm.
I can see exactly how that would spill over in that way. And
Mhm.
yeah, I wonder what else are there any other ways you can think of that some of these, I like how you describe those kind of binary relationship options stop people from being able to find happiness or understand who they are as themselves.
Question. That's a great question. Besides these romantic binaries, what other
Yeah.
binaries? Is that what your question is? What do you,
Yes.
I'd love to know what you think, Kara. I know you've thought about this a lot too.
Oh
I,
man.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm hardly an expert on this kind of thing, but I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's kind of one of those things where if you learn from a young enough age that there's only, these two options, I feel like the conclusion that people are almost bound to come to if they don't exactly fit one of those is that, well, the problem must be me. These are the options that I've been presented and I don't fit into them. And I'm being told that this is all there is. This is natural, If I'm not this way, maybe I'm broken. And I can't help but wonder if it's the same thing with, these relationship expectations that you were mentioning too, where, you have to be a couple. It has to look a certain way. It has to be like the 2.5 kids and white picket fence, or else there's something wrong with you.
right.
And I'm sure that isn't the case. I imagine, you mentioned a lot of people coming, for therapy, to understand why they're not happy in this, very particular relationship. I imagine it's probably been the case that many of those people would have been happier not in that relationship.
Yes. And that was just not an option. And that's why I say, when I ask them, what were you taught about being a good, I'm kind of fascinated too. I want to help them, but I also want to understand, what were you taught about a good relationship? What were you taught about being a fulfilled adult? And the thing is, there's no neutral adult. It's fulfilled man, fulfilled woman, and they really do look different. And even for progressive people with lots of education, they were still taught dad works, mom stays home and works, but we don't call it work because it's not paid. But mom does a whole bunch of stuff and it's her job, and dad comes home after earning and puts his feet up, and mom doesn't ask anything of him because he's worked hard all day. And honest to God, you would think 2023 that I wouldn't hear things like that, but I do. Now I hear a lot of couples going, the women in the couple, I don't want that. I do not want that. So how do we make this work where he doesn't resent me for me asking to participate in rearing our children and caring for our home and its surroundings? And that also the social, that woman being the link to sociality, so anyway, that's a big problem. Now, I don't think I'm living, no offense, in the rural South. I'm not. I'm living in progressive, educated, more people with their masters than almost any state, and this is still these very old-fashioned ideas of what is a given in a couple.
Yes. Oh, you're so right. And I'm just thinking, the same thing. I've heard so many people recently, and people that I don't think of as being, very old fashioned or anything, who have said things like what you're describing to me, like, well, my husband gets his identity from his work, and that's normal for men, but for women, we don't care that much.
For women, we don't care. Right. Yeah, I just think of my grandmother, who was an amazing young person who loved languages, loved learning about culture, and that's pretty rad for the early, 1900s. And, she got married, he graduated college really young as a teenager and went to the Library of Congress for her first job. And her husband followed her, her fiance. They only held hands, she told me, until they got married. Which I love. But he had to finish law school before they would get married. And anyway, linguist, Romance languages was her undergraduate, very bright. And she left Washington State to work at the Library of Congress on her own. This sounds like a really incredible thing. And yet she was very conservative, believe it or not, about marriage. She definitely thought it's good to have an education. But what I learned through the generations is, but you should have something to fall back on. But the thing is, the thing that you fall back on is your career. The thing you depend on is your husband. So, education was to fall back on. And so I know, even though that in the big picture, none of the women in my family would ever sound like this if we were to bring them here. But the thing is, it's in there. I've even heard as early, as this year, that so-and-so might be an attorney. I said, oh, wouldn't that be great? Civil rights attorney. Wow. Oh, no. She really wants to be a mom. So I said, can she not do both? Well, she'll be more fulfilled as a mother. So I really did hear that, and I'm not going to name names, but that was 2023. So I do feel things are weird. As one person says, we're like rocks in a tumbler, it's bumpy here. Are we going to be polished, separate polished rocks? Or are we going to be some kind of mix of a whole that is improving? And I'd like to believe we're going to be a diverse bunch who continue to improve and polish each other.
Yes.
It's an odd time.
It is. And that's why I think, books like yours are so important to call attention to these kinds of things and say it out loud, instead of walking around with everyone having these kind of tropes and relationship guidelines in the back of their head. Let's pull them out and examine them and see if we want to keep these or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you had to pick a few of the top kind of, relationship rules or tropes that you would like to get rid of, which ones do you think we could definitely do without moving forward?
Wonderful. Well, gosh, two come to mind. One just basic one is that women, oh, God, I'm sorry, that movie's just so working on me still, but that, oh, gosh, we got to pause for a second. I'm going to breathe. Thank you. I think it's time for a deep breath. So I'm going to take a nice deep breath.
Excellent idea.
But
something I need to do more.
Yeah, what comes to mind are, the biggest one is women are not their bodies. And I think, we've had, since, gosh, obviously the women's movement has said we need bodily autonomy, right? So in the early days, in the early 70s, that was what was fought for a lot. It was a major piece of the work. And in, I think in the 80s, it was much more women need to be able to have equal power and equal pay, something we haven't yet achieved. But that was very much a kind of autonomy of earning was a very big focus. And so I think these themes of, but she's a woman, so she can't be president, she can have autonomy but not be president. What if she gets her period? So again, this power and body seem to go hand in hand with why women should be limited and controlled on, like you say, I was saying before, protected. She needs to be protected from her body, bodily struggles that affect her brain, and her capacity to think rationally. So, so for me, women as bodies, that would be a good one to toss. That the other thing to toss is that women's bodies are for men, straight men in this case, that women need to, this is what I'd like to have tossed out, that women, you are your body and your body must be desirable to a man, and you must find a man and have him as your own and have his children as your own and be proud, and then you'll be happy. Those are the things that I was taught that I had to almost lose my mind over, right? Crack up. I believe they are such not true for me experiences and not liberating for me experiences that I kind of want to lift the rug up and go, hey, everybody, you don't have to do that. And that may be a worthwhile thing to question. You don't have to not do it either, but I'm just saying that's not for everybody. And so I do feel, the crack up part of it is you should and do want that. You should and do want that. Well, what if I don't? What should I do? And that's where I like us to think together critically. What if we loved what we loved and we weren't so afraid that that might not fit two things? Um, what if we loved what we loved, and the arrangements that people chose to be in for actualizing that love um, had variety? Would that be so threatening? And I know, it's just very rare that you hear people say to in this case, single woman, are, it's just so rare to say, how are you enjoying your single life? That's assuming you're hooking up all the time. It's never assumed that you're enjoying your life as a singular person. It's assumed you're almost married. So you're single still, you know what I mean? So it's a very dependent hallway. You're in the hallway. When are you going to come over to this room called happiness that is about being coupled? So, and that's my experience. I do feel not everyone can relate to what I'm saying, but I definitely feel there is room for this conversation.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I like the way you put it too, where, it's not that people can't want these things or there's something wrong with wanting these things, but it surely doesn't describe everybody. And maybe we need to have room for them too.
Right. And let their voices be heard, their questions be heard.
Mm-hmm.
The multiplicity being, I always just say, why is love so threatening? To love what we love who we love doing what we love. They don't always have to have a fit Life magazine in the 50s.
Yes.
So,
yes.
and we see people suffer. And I used to say, I've really given it a lot of thought, because this book, Cracking Up, it really is meant to speak to mental health challenges because of the mixed messages. And it is also meant to inspire laughter because of the mixed messages. They're so absurd. I have images in here, and I have an illustrator who's helped me with the images, named Chris Diaz. And we're having so much fun because the images of what girls are supposed to focus on, how advertising was trying to prep them to be desirable bodies, how they're supposed to always want to be smaller, and if they're going to be in a happy heterosexual marriage, they have to stay slender. And even after they've had babies, which is what they're supposed to want more than anything in the world, they're supposed to return to their girlish figure to keep their man. And just, wow, what a tilt to tell and train people that you're not going to be fulfilled if you're not hooked up to this system, this machinery of where you're constantly working on being smaller. And again, for males on the planet, you constantly have to be bigger than you feel inside. You're constantly having to be richer than you feel you could ever be. And you certainly could be fat and ugly, but you better be making money if you want a woman. And those are terrifying things for men as well. I won't be loved if I'm not fitting some kind of Marlboro man, abundance of wealth and masculinity. So I do feel they may not worry so much as women are taught to about their figure, their frame, but they do worry about their earning. And both men and women, again, are commodified. And we see this, if you look at Tinder, you can really see what I'm talking about. People who don't know about online dating probably wonder what I'm saying, but the thing is, there is such a sales of gender binaries, buy this, fall into this, or at least buy into this, that you'll be happy if. But for the men, you'll be happy if you have money and autonomy and a bracelet called a female on your shoulder, on your hand. Women, you'll be happy if you have a man. I mean, it's not the man as bracelet isn't the deal. It's you'll, in my training, be happy if you have a man, children who look beautiful, and have children who look beautiful and are smart, but not too smart if they're girls. Because too smart girls will never have a man. So honest to God, I'm trying to offer a rosy picture here, but that was the training. And it's not just family. I do believe these are kind of religious things too, that there's a religious terror of female autonomy. And with the even witch trials that we know of, women own land. That was a big deal. And the church wanted that land. So we're going to find a way to take that land. She shouldn't have it. God intended that land to be toiled by men and women to multiply, be blessed by the fruit of the womb, So I do feel these are old religious ideas, and they are oddly held up by certain popular trends we see, by our culture in general, this capital acquiring culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting point about how, maybe why some of these harmful and clearly outdated tropes continue to hang on. If there's money behind them and religious fear behind them, that's hard to change those kind of beliefs. Well, what do you think people can do? Like people who have been given these mixed messages and they're thinking, something isn't right here, but maybe they're still feeling ashamed for not matching with those images. What can people do to kind of get that out of their head? Or is there anything we can do?
Well, first off, thank you for your show, and thank you for the resources that you make available to people through your link that they follow. There's several resources. I am such a believer in community and dialogue, and anytime someone says I'm miserable, I always say, well, who are you talking to? Because I, as your therapist, am just one person, and I like people to meet people with similar interests or similar concerns. I can't hook you up, to every group that I love, because I don't want to be, pushing any kind of solution to people. But I do think when I have folk who are questioning, do I fit my gender, I hook them up to gender questioning groups. There's I used to be part of a group called Emerging Gender, and that it didn't mean you know who you are or anything, but you want to talk about, what does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? What if I don't really relate to my mom's hope for me as a girl or as a boy? My dad's not proud of me. I don't like sports, or whatever. So conversations to me is a great place. I believe we need more conversation. And I do think with COVID, folk have almost calcified into their own kind of private life, isolated life, so that they're almost stuck there now. Even though we're taking off our masks, there's an element of coming outside of ourselves that isn't happening. And I would like that to happen more. But conversations with safe people, and I do believe they can find some links in your chat. Um, um, and I'm happy to share what I can, but community is the answer for me of questioning others, not people who agree with me necessarily, but questioning. Because when we don't have that, we only have the dominant cultural pressures to belong. And that the belonging to the dominant culture means cutting off parts of ourselves. So if I were to belong, I would have to fit the status quo, which would mean be a good feminine girl, be a docile, pretty, smaller bodied, male, wanting, etc., procreative girl. And wow, well, what other kind? Well, there's the sad girl. Remember, so it's like the happy girl has all those things. The sad girl is someone who thinks critically and is a thorn in my side, so that critical thinker doesn't have a good name in this arrangement. But I would definitely say when this is how, even in the 20s, in World War I, women, post-World War I, sorry, women would be sewing together. They called them sewing circles. But believe it or not, those women were the origin of the anti-war movement. So they would talk about having lost their sons or brothers in World War I. And through that organizing, hearing, each other, they've organized to try to find alternatives to war. So for me, the conversation starting is the site for real creativity. That's my faith, I have to tell you, Kara.
I love it. Yeah. And that's, such a great point, being here and starting the conversation with us is awesome. And I know we have a lot of people who have questions that they're going to want to ask you, but before we go to the Q&A, is there anything else that you do want to talk about this evening?
Well, that's a great question. First off, I'm so excited to talk to people because that's the joy. I mean, I actually been wanting you to talk more. And I know that this is your show, but I know that I just appreciate your heritage as well. And I know you were raised Protestant, I Catholic, and that there are similarities. Like Protestants, I think, aren't they the movement of the purity ball? And
Oh yes, we had all that. And you get engaged basically to Jesus, and you get your purity ring, and you are bound by that or else. And it's a lot. And I know that's I guess the purity balls were kind of I don't know, maybe that started in the 90s, I want to say, but that messaging, that goes into those, goes much farther back, like you were mentioning, this idea of, women being valued for their bodies, and in this case for their bodies being, quote unquote virginal, and, a prize for a man to, I don't know, conquer. It's a very kind of gross imagery.
Plant his seed. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Fertile. Yeah. Fertile soil. So wow. And then the desiring body is always male, but where's the desiring female body? That's the one that's apologizing for her sins. If she desires. And in my book, I look at desire for women is often not about sex, but more about food. And I even have research that shows women more, I mean, again, want ice cream more than an orgasm. I know that. Now, I don't mean that's true, right? I'm just saying the research that I will post in the notes talks about a survey. It says 1 in 5 Americans eat ice cream in bed. More women admit to eating ice cream in bed than men, and more women eat ice cream as a meal compared to men. Younger women lead the pack, according to this survey. This includes eating ice cream instead of a meal, sneaking extra servings, keeping a secret stash, and eating ice cream in bed. Okay. Then the survey says that, you know, people, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, this one. Sorry, Mom, I'm quoting you. My mother said to my sister, be careful not to have premarital sex because it's just like eating a hot fudge sundae. You'll just want another. So it's best not to even have one.
Oh, that's so sad.
That's from my book. From my book. Sorry, Mom. I know she's listening. So, but anyway, so I would love to look at the Protestant and Catholic, questions about purity. Certainly in the Catholic tradition, Mary was a virgin, and supposedly the Holy Spirit impregnated her. But she was the only pregnant teenager, unwed, that wasn't punished. Now, unwed teenager, someone that would really have to go in a special school. Even in my era, girls that got pregnant would be sent to some kind of school, boarding school for wayward girls. So Mary was the only not wayward girl who was a pregnant teenager. But I would love to hear, I know we, in terms of the ideal female, also as Protestants and Catholics raised, probably got a little bit different tilt. Ours was heavy on wanting nothing. Like we were really into the fasting saints. If you're going to be a good woman, you've got to be a good suffering servant. I don't know if that was big in the Protestant traditions as much, but imitating Jesus, like let's say Mother Teresa, the biggest heroine, she used to talk, I am nothing, God is everything. I am empty vessel. I am, she said, pencil, and God is the lead. In the hand of God, God is the lead. Like I am empty. So there's a lot of emptiness, and I don't know if that focus was as big.
Yeah, and I don't know if my experience is necessarily, all of, the Protestant versions. There's probably several, but that wasn't as big in the churches and the schools that I went to. It was more about the being meek and silent and not arguing, and very much the Proverbs 31 woman. That was a big thing. It's in that chapter, it describes, I guess, what's supposed to be an ideal wife or something. And it was always going back to that. Well, you need to go to Proverbs and be that way. And of course, I remember on one occasion pointing out, well, the woman in that chapter is like owning a business or managing business. So is that what you mean? No. You're taking that out of context. It's not that. You need to be more quiet.
Wow, that's a great. Can I read that proverb just real quick?
Sure.
Okay, the perfect wife. How hard is it to find the perfect wife? She is worth far more than jewels. Her husband depends on her. He will never be poor. She does good for her husband all her life. She never causes him trouble. She's always gathering wool and flax and enjoys making things with her hands. She is like a ship from a faraway place. She brings home food from everywhere. There sounds like a businesswoman. She wakes up early in the morning, cooks food for her family, and gives servants their share. She looks at land and buys it. She uses the money she's earned and plants a vineyard. She sounds like a genius. She works very hard. She is strong and able to do all her work. She works late into the night to make sure her business earns a profit. She makes her own thread and weaves her own cloth. She always gives to the poor and helps those who need it. She does not worry about her family when it snows. She has given them all good warm clothes. She makes sheets and spreads for the beds, and she wears clothes of fine linen. Her husband is a respected member of the city council, where he meets with other leaders, I'm assuming men. She makes clothes and belts and sells them to merchants. She is a strong person. People respect her. She looks to the future with confidence. She speaks with wisdom and teaches others to be loving and kind. She oversees the care of her house. She is never lazy. Her children say good things about her. Her husband brags about her and says, there are many good women, but you are the best. Grace and beauty can fool you, but a woman who respects the Lord should be praised. Give her the reward she deserves. Praise her in public for what she has done. Now, I'm not sure that's the Gateway Bible I just pulled up, but I love that she's a businesswoman.
Yes, and it's not a minor part of the passage. It's kind of the whole thing that she's doing all day. And it was always so surprising to me that this was the text that people would be referred to. And yet, in the same breath, it would be, well, you need to stop trying to do men's work and you need to, be more quiet, and a woman's place is in the home. And I would always have these arguments and say, that's not what this says.
Right? I just love it. She's an entrepreneur and an artist as well. Those are two really cool things that I don't believe are taught in Bible studies. I haven't seen that, but now I could be wrong. And I know I have very, very dedicated religious people in my family, and they are trying to be conversational with other traditions. So I don't want to dismiss biblical traditions. In this case is what we're focused on. And I definitely know there are people out there saying, hey, how can we make this open up the dialogue between traditions? And how can we, like we're doing right now, just talk about what this says and how rad it was to say, hey, speak up positively towards your partner. So, I think that's pretty cool. And certainly we don't hear that as much when we are seeing violence being tolerated. I know when I did domestic violence research, my initial work was to educate ministers. And part of why I went to seminary was to educate ministers on domestic violence so that they would stop preaching from the pulpit that women need to cover their heads and be silent, like it says in the Pauline literature in the New Testament, or what Greek Testament for Christians. And so for me, I was really concerned with the biblical passages that had women be silent, cover their head, don't speak. That's for men. And you've heard me say, if you can't pee like Jesus, you can't be like Jesus. And so for me, I think, even at Princeton Seminary, men were tacking up notes on the church's door that said women should be silent and cover their head, as it says in 2 Timothy.
Wow.
That was on the door at Princeton in the mid 80s. They tacked it like Martin Luther. So
I'm going to say it. That's so tacky.
Yeah. I mean, to me, anything, I love diversity, right? I'll fight for your right to stand against what I'm saying or whatever. But really, that's pretty, pretty disturbing and again, 21st, late 20th century at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody
What does that
says,
tell you? It tells you that there's an increasing shrinkage to the majority rule, right? So, hey, wait a minute, we have too many women here in this seminary. More and more women and people of color and queer people preaching from the pulpit. We got to shut you people up because Jesus said, and of course, as you and I know, Pauline literature, secondary literature, Paul's students supposedly writing what they knew about Jesus, which Paul didn't even know Jesus, right? So Jesus lived 90 years before Paul wrote a word or died. So we've got this extended literature going down the line that is sounding more and more hostile to female voices, and that is exactly why, is that they were white, in this case not white, but in the powers that be were losing the sense that they are calling the shots. So once we hear, it's like, cover your heads, be quiet. Well, if you have to say cover your heads, be quiet, that meant someone was speaking up. And so good on those early women who were reading the literature in ways that sounded more liberating, because that's what they did, is they said, here in the text, we have this woman who's running her own business. What do you say about that? Like, that's all they're doing is talking. And I think that that's sort of where we are. Let's have these important conversations. Things don't change by being good, by being a good girl. Things do not improve for all of us if any part of the population is silenced. And
excellent.
we're
Excellent
so,
points.
we're so privileged to have this chance to talk now, and I hope for more voices to come up and be heard.
Yes, and thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this. And I think this is probably a good time to actually go to the Q&A. So let's do that. Okay, and we will now transition to the actual Q&A. So we have here with us Dr. Manlowe. If you would like to go ahead and unmute, there you are. Hi.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome. That was such a great conversation.
And love all the chats. They're brilliant.
Yes, and we are super excited to be able to have some Q&A time with you this evening. You are in high demand, so we will get right down to it. And if anybody does have additional questions that you didn't already put in the chat, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll get through as many of them as we can in the next few minutes. And then we'll wrap up after that and move to the Hangout, and we can continue the conversation there as well. So, okay, first up, I like this first question that we got. Someone is wondering, are you hopeful for the future, or do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
Great question. Gosh, I mean, in the 80s, I would have thought things were improving. I'm sure civil rights movement, same thing. It's like, oh, we got laws. We know that you can't change hearts and minds with laws, civil rights laws, but it can certainly be a beginning, a site for, social justice is now going to be more easy to fight for, we thought, in the civil rights legislation. So the same thing goes in the 70s. We thought women were going to have support for safe and safe medical procedure should they need an abortion. And that was something that was their constitutional right. To have that get overturned, I would never have predicted that. Now, other people know who have been on the forefront that there's a body of people that have been working to have that Roe v. Wade overturned since the beginning. And that I sort of took notes that 26 states were poised to enact bans right on when that was overturned, so that it went right into action. So half of those went into immediate effect, and used Justice Alito's, a Catholic, quote that there's no exception for incest or rape. And so this very much goes back to this idea: why is women's autonomy so threatening? Why must their bodies be someone else's? And they were chattel, as we know, in biblical era, not unlike cows and camels. I guess it would be camels, chattel. So if you had one of those, it was for you to use. And if someone else used your wife, you could kill your wife and that other person, because that was yours. That wife was yours. So it was an object of yours, males. So this is, I know people would say, oh, Jen, that's quite a stretch. You're not chattel. But I'm like, well, wait, you're making my body something you decide what happens to it. And you can arrest me if I should choose to take my body into my own hands, and get the medical help I need, safe medical help for an abortion. I shouldn't have to make a case for my right to it. It's my body. But people are, well, we're going to not only arrest you, we'll arrest the gal or guy or person who drove you across the state lines because it was illegal in our state. So I would never have thought it would get this bad. Sorry for the long answer to your question, but I would never have imagined that Handmaid's Tale would be closer to our reality in 2023. But as Margaret Atwood said in her book, the first page, I believe, that everything you're going to read in here has happened or is happening. None of this is made up. These atrocities of human rights. So I don't want to be hopeless. I am very much, an educator for years. I had really thought information that was could be enlightening. I believe that if we had the knowledge, we would have new behavior. And so for me, when once I saw politicians getting into office who were talking about grabbing women by the pussy, and they let you do it if you're famous, I actually thought, are you kidding me? This guy is in office? I know that I could seem naive to people on the Hill, but it just got worse. So for me, things have gotten worse. How much worse are they going to get? I'd like to believe there's going to be a stopping point to what seems to be out of control, entitlement to not only women's bodies, but to saying LGBTQ folk can't, get surgery, can't serve in the military, can't, like things that we sort of fought and won, we thought have slid. So what I've learned is everything we thought we fought and won has to be vigilantly protected. And so that's up to us. Yes, that's up to us. And I do believe wherever you can be continually informed and informing beyond posting on social media, because that's not going to go too far, but can you get on the ground? Can you get to your civic conversations in face-to-face, mass-to-mass time. These are really important things we can do, is to come out and talk. I just this morning had a great talk with my differently committed relatives, and some of them had, really have strong opinions of even about the Super Bowl and Rihanna, and how that was obscene and, this kind of thing. And we had a really civil conversation about our concerns about women as bodies and being rendered only read on the level of the surface. So yes, there's hope if we keep being involved and not just social media. Anyone can post a TikTok. It's not a bad place to begin, but it's not a place to stay and end.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, great points. It's discouraging, but it sounds like there's a little bit of hope in there too if we take action. So I like that perspective.
And start small. It does. Gandhi. I know someone spoke about Gandhi's not exactly perfect, and no activist has been, but he did say your little teaspoon contributes to the great ocean. And so start in your relationships to be curious, compassionate curiosity, like help me understand how you got there. Someone said, well, how can we do that with an incel, involuntarily celibate men that many have said women should be raped, murdered, or carved up so that they're have deformations on their face, like they are so angry that they're not chosen by women. So what a terrifying movement. Now, would it be great if they were in small numbers? But they're not. They're in like 90,000 of these folk, and that's the last time we tested, checked. I'm sure the Southern Poverty Law Center, they track hate groups. I'm sure they probably know more accurately how many. They're often on 4chan, where you can't really track them because they're in the dark web. But there's some serious hostility.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It can be pretty scary if you dwell on that too long. Helen, were you about to ask another question? I think I cut you off.
Yeah, that's fine. So, on the note, we were talking about women's rights. So what do you think about like women that have like internalized misogyny, like Amy Coney Barrett, and a lot of these women we see influencing online that want to teach women how to be from like a biblical way, and then basically saying that's feminism. So I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that good question. Yes. I'm thinking, yeah, Amy, in her past, Coney Barrett, I guess might be the proper Justice Coney Barrett. I don't want to call her by her first name just because it's female. You wouldn't say Sam to Alito. But so yeah, Justice in quotes, Amy Coney Barrett, is basically a frightening prospect. Even in her earlier iteration was considered a handmaid. I mean, Handmaid's Tale. So, and her talking about liberating women to not choose what goes in or out of their bodies, quite terrifying to me. So the doublespeak, the languaging, the co-opting of liberation language has been going on for a while. And again, in politics, you hear that a lot. We're going to defend and protect the earth, this kind of thing, by folk that actually want to keep big oil running, so the doublespeak is something to watch out for. Yeah, the brainwashing, the truth in lowercase t, like like, in other words, that kind of, oh, that's alternate news. Remember how that one time we heard, oh, that news that was your news isn't true. Our news is true. So what is true is tricky because the bias is so real, and people are telling their pod what is true. And that can include us too, posting what is true. And we only post it to our pod. And so we're living in two truths world, at least two. So this is, yeah, it's disturbing. Can we even have a conversation? My feeling, yes, we can. But it does include stepping off the virtual world and into the real face-to-face space, because we won't talk as hostilely as we do online. And
Oh, that's for sure. Or at least I hope not.
yeah, to not drop the mic. You know how in rappers can each take their mic and do their brilliant poetry back and forth. To not drop the mic and walk away. That's what I saw all the last 8 years, really. Drop the mic. I'm right. I'm not even going to listen to you. So what happened this morning with my diversity of beliefs and commitments, we each took our turn talking about what we understood is going on in the world, and did not agree. But it's like the talking stick. We gave each other the talking stick, so each person could share her perspective. And I believe it can start as small as being in a car with people. So don't wait for town hall, though I do think go to town hall when any chance you get where you care about a concern. I really believe they start small.
I like that. Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that resonate in the chat as well, with people kind of picking that up and saying, do what you can, make some ripples with, the stone you can throw. I did not describe that as eloquently as they said.
And to compassionate curiosity, like, I want to understand how you got to that. The incel, could I talk to the incel who wants to carve up my face? I don't think it would be easy, and I don't think I would sign up for that. But could another guy who was an incel get back in there and start talking what helped him leave? Yes. So there are smart ways to get conversations opening up a little. But in our own immediate families, I do think it helps to, if they're safe people, if you're not going to be harmed, I do think it's a chance to be curious, and versus waiting to jump and lance their idiotic ideas. You know what I mean? It's like, boom, and now we're done. So that's not going to make a better world. So
Yeah. Well, okay, I think we have time for one more question before we move to the hangout. And this is one that you touched on already. I would love to hear a little more on this one. They asked, in Abrahamic faiths, it seems that men are the only ones who have sexual desire and women don't have sexual desire. Do you agree with that characterization? I guess both in terms of that is what is portrayed, and how realistic is that? What do we do with that messaging?
well, I think that's more of a popular cultural ideal. I don't think sexual desire was articulated in the Bible. The theological material came later. The early centuries, the first 400 centuries, there was much more talk about women and their temptresses. Even the Adam and Eve story wasn't about sex at all until it was made into doctrine for the Catholic Church. Augustine and John of Chisholm both, or John of Chrysostom, they actually had a real debate on what that whole temptation story was about. And John of Chrysostom, his was more of a moral tale about good and bad. And for Augustine, who had a sexual, what we would call a sexual addiction today, compulsive helplessness around his need to have sex with many people, many women. Who knows if it was more than women? He read it through sexual lines. He read it through what he called tumescence, which is, I can't control my erection, and it's because of women's temptation that my body is pulled into sin. And so Augustine was also trained in the Manichaean school, Zoroastrian, which was very black and white, and the body and the spirit were separate. So the body pulled the spirit down into sin. So anyway, I know that's a little bit longer theology, but the sexuality discourse did not come, it was layered on top. They call it eisegesis, where it's put back in the text versus the text talking about sexual desire, in my opinion. Even the don't sleep, what people think Leviticus is about anti-gay stuff. And it has nothing to do with that, with sexuality. It has to do with don't sleep, meaning get contagious. Don't succumb to contagion with the non-believer. And it was much more about those people aren't us. And there's a lot of that in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, but especially the Hebrew Bible, because there was a definition of self. We are the Hebrew people. We are not you. Okay. So they're trying to define themselves. They're a diaspora. They're moving about all the time. Well, who are the real Hebrews? We're not you. So it was in part to, just like in any kind of nationalism, folk define themselves against what they're not. So Leviticus is not about sex. So Adam and Eve is not about sex. That's a doctrine, Catholic doctrine, made sense of by Augustine and utilized well at the time to kind of gather Christians, we kind of gather them and have them be afraid and of their bodies, be afraid. I can't control this. Who can I control? What can I control? Let's make laws that control this. And I do think, back to the whole anti-choice movement, we are scared of the changes going on in the world. What can I control? I don't feel in control. How about I police the borders because of different people coming in here? We got to keep those people outside. We're the inside, as if there were, as if this nation is under threat. And you will hear that discourse. We're under threat. Remember the disease. They're like rats. They're, all of these things that could contaminate the body, the white, in my opinion, white European body that founded America. It's like, yikes. But there's that discourse that is born of anxiety and frantic identity, so I'm not you. We need to silence you and or make you obey. We need more, they'll say, to return to America. I'm like, really? You want to go back into the 50s when it was illegal to drink from a certain fountain if you were a certain color, where women couldn't have bank accounts, where, without their husband's signature and permission? Animals had rights before women had rights to not be beaten. So you want to go back to the good old days? So for me, this sexual thing, I'm not dissing what the person said. I'm just saying that was overlaid. And all the biblical passages we make sense of are fraught with where we are in time. They're full of things that influence us right now. People that want to go back to the pure days of prayer in schools are often, that's code for when there was more order, in my opinion. White Christian rule was enforced. And, we got to discipline people. So to me, that I think there's a real, since Obama got elected, there's been more guns bought. There's been more feelings of threat that, that we need to protect ourselves against the threat, as I say, darker skinned people coming across the border. You don't have that kind of anxiety unless there's a sense that the white population is diminished. The white male population isn't sought after. And those incels are a great example.
Yeah. And I heard a rumor that we might have an episode on that topic a little bit later on this year, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, thank you for those comments. This has been really informative and enlightening. I always love talking with you. I always learn a lot, and I love hearing about all of your books.
And appreciate this chance. And I really, as I say, want to hear more from you, your story, being raised in a Protestant binary essentializing women's bodies and men's bodies as if they are knowable things on the ends of spectrums. I really want to hear, I hope you have some topic that you do, Kara, about gender binaries and what's happening in our world, that so many people are raising their hand and saying, not for me. That's an urgent concern. How many young kids will take their lives because they don't feel it's okay to be themselves. And then they're reduced, right? There's another form of trauma that happens when we're dismissed as being trendy, or, oh, you're hysterical, or, oh, this is just because you're an adolescent. I think we need to hear more about experiences from people, but also what's happening in the overarching trends right now, where people are saying, that binary thing is not accurate for me. I feel excited about that.
And it's not accurate for a lot of people, and it's not been the only conception of how to divide up and organize humans in a lot of the history of human societies. That's not been the only way we do it. There are not just two choices, and that's not a new idea. So you're right. That is a topic that we should probably dig deeper into. So okay, I'm putting that on the calendar. We're going to do that. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think it's about time that we head towards the hangout. Are you going to be able to stick around for any of the hangout with us?
About 15 more minutes.
Perfect. Perfect. All right.
Thank you so much, Kara. Thank you for this honor, and what a brilliant audience you have that care so much about making a better world. And I just hope I haven't bummed people out. I'm just saying, let's not assume this is just a passing thing. We have to be vigilant about our human rights. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and talking with us again. And we'll go ahead and wrap up real quickly, and then we can move to the hangout. And so we don't take up too much more of your time, because I know you are busy. And so, real quickly then, just our final housekeeping at the very end. Don't forget that we'll be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We'll be here with ex-Christian Aaron, so definitely don't want to miss that one. And of course, you don't want to miss any of the previous episodes that are also available on our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. So definitely look those up. And if you have questions, comments, ideas for future shows or topics like what we've just been talking about, send us an email at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And don't forget to check out the blog and the podcast for more content. And you can also follow us on the social medias. We are on Facebook. We also have a Facebook support group page. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'm dropping all of those links here. And if you use any of those platforms, check us out. Do a like, a subscribe, a share, whatever it is that happens on those platforms. It really helps us out. In addition to keeping you up to date on all of the goings on around RfR, it also helps other people find us and make use of our services, which is what we're here for.